So this is our opportunity to discuss the Dharma, raise any questions that you might have about the practice, about applying the practice in life. And since we have a lot of people with a whole variety of experience, you don't need to rely on just me to have something helpful perhaps to contribute. So this is your turn to think, what is it? What is it that is important? What would be helpful to clarify how to practice, clarify the meditation instructions, clarify how to apply the sense of meditation in life, how to cultivate activities of body, speech, and mind so that they're helpful. So, it's your turn. Linda. Thank you.
So I recite the Dorje Chang Tumma, and of course there's the one line that says, this meditator who has given up all attachment to this life, and I felt okay with that. I mean, I knew I was full of attachment and aversion, but recently I've really fallen in love, and I'm highly attached. And so I feel very fraudulent when I'm reciting this line. It's kind of like I'm mentally negotiating, like how to use this attachment for the benefit of beings, because I clearly don't want to let go.
If you could use...
Well, I mean, I know I'm going to die, so I mean,
okay.
all that stuff, but...
Die and all that stuff. Okay. Let's just hold that thought for a second. So if you really could be engaged in this relationship in such a way that it was of profound benefit to all beings, do you think it really would be a matter of attachment?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know. Yeah.
You could think about that.
Yeah. I mean, it would be a different kind of attachment, I would think.
I think you should think about that part.
Well, I thought maybe you and Dora would have some experience around this. To make it kind of interpersonal.
Okay. She's going for the microphone. But I want to go back before we get down to the nitty-gritty of that. Perhaps just as a way to forestall that conversation. You mentioned the Dorje Chang Tumma as though everybody would know exactly what that was. No. I'm kidding about that, but just to make sure that people are up to speed and to put this line into context, this particular prayer is a prayer that was written by this yogi who spent, it was more than a decade on an island in a lake in Tibet. And so this yogi was speaking from kind of a first-person perspective. And we recite this prayer because it turns our mind to remember the incredible work that the people who really went deeply into meditation to the point where they could really be sources of refuge, what the work that they did. And the prayer also outlines kind of stages of meditation along the way. And one of those stages is actually the shift from being dependent upon conditions, as in attached to all circumstances, and not being dependent on conditions as a source of well-being. So it's very hard when we think about close personal relationships. This is kind of like, whoa, like, can we talk about something else first? And actually we should. We will be probably creating harm if we try to kind of force ourselves into some kind of moralistic approach to this, as opposed to seeing it more from the inside out, more seeing it from the point of view of how would it be if I could be in relationship to all beings, and in relationship to all beings who are very kind of immediately surrounding me, in a way where I was not placing a burden for my well-being on them. So when we shift over to that, as opposed to, in order to be a nice girl or a nice boy, we should give up this. We should, abandon this, give it up. Otherwise, kind of we're being wrong in some way. So that's not so helpful. Seeing what when we talk about, somebody came up with a much better word than renunciation just lately. It was at one of the Eric did. Do you remember? Did anybody remember?
Somebody else was here too.
Yeah. No. Okay. We don't remember, but it was something that didn't quite have the edge of this kind of what in our minds looks like kind of an aggressive pushing away of things.
Yeah, it's often, like developing a revulsion. I mean, I can wish to have my confusion released. I mean, that's often the way I translate that. And I do really appreciate that I don't hold that someone is responsible for my well-being, my happiness. That's an easy way for me to view something. Yeah. But it still feels attachment,
What? Yeah, sure. So we go for a refuge until full enlightenment. This is not like we get it right and then we go for refuge. It's an unfolding over time. So I think the important thing in this is to try to look carefully for, particularly look carefully for the low-hanging fruit of attachment that complicates matters. Look carefully for the things in relationship, not just your most close intimate relationship, but look for things in our relationship with all the people that we're connected to, where our attachment is creating the most friction, the most burden. Step away. Kind of see those for what they are. And if we talk about renunciation, I remember this is back in 1980 when His Holiness 16th Karmapa came, and at that point the young Jamgon Kongtrul, previous Jamgon Kongtrul came, and he was giving a talk, and somebody asked a question also about renunciation. And he'd been teaching in Tibetan, and this person was going on with similar kind of concern. And he said, then he just stopped him in the middle, and in English said, "That's not renunciation, that's repression." So I've thought of it, renunciation is more like thinking that there was this really cool pair of shoes that you thought these are going to, and you put them on, and they pinch. And then for a while you think, well, if I just break them in. But the longer it goes, the worse the blisters get. And finally you just say, no, it's not working. This is not good for me. It's not good for anyone else. So that's where that kind of recognition of what's helpful and what's harmful is the core of renunciation, not some kind of moral principle to live up to, or you're a naughty Buddhist. It's very gradual, I think.
Thank you.
There is. What? Oh, yeah. All right. Yes. All right.
That was good enough, or good. so I hesitate to add. But on the other hand, it was such a great question. Just one thing that occurred to me was, it feels like something like being in love, it shines a light on something that, like when we're not in love, it's still there. I mean, the attachment, maybe there's more aversion then, or maybe there's more indifference or walling off, or there's something, so the attachment, it's not I mean, in a way it's a new thing, but it's actually, we are already oriented towards this pattern, attachment, aversion, indifference, and whether, whatever is happening. Anyway, this is a way of seeing it more clearly because there's some kind of stronger thing that's coming. So it's not like you have more to work on than you did before, or than I have, or than anyone, that you're, so in a way it's good that you're seeing it. And of course, and I totally, it's helpful what Bill was saying. And there's also, of course, the two things I think of. One is the kind of, what, like Eric was stressing on the retreats when we would contemplate the four immeasurables, wishing happiness for others and compassion, having compassion for others' suffering. So always, that's a thing to bring into the picture of, instead of my happiness is so great, and and really going there, like spread it out, use that energy and make more of it for everyone, and embracing and including. And so that, I think it's a way to use that attachment feeling. And then on the other side, as you mentioned, I know I'm going to die and stuff. And that's a good thing to also remember, where just thinking of that next to, I'm so in love with this person, I'm going to die. Like, that just right there creates a little perspective. And I feel like that's a good exercise, too, to sort of bring into our contemplations, so that we get a little healthy distance from the, just the emotional takeover.
Mm-hmm. We can definitely use the sense of well-being that's possible when we feel like we have that kind of support. We can use that to enhance our ability to be of benefit to others. So that's a good thing. This is, at the end of meditation, we dedicate the merit. So in a certain way, you can dedicate the merit of the sense of well-being. You can dedicate this to others. May this well-being allow me to be of greater service and benefit.
I super appreciate the question. Before, I think it was last night, I was anticipating coming in the Q&A session, and I wondered, like, why doesn't sexuality come up more often in this discussion of Buddhism? Because it's huge, really.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm just going to throw in my 2 cents, like how I'm dealing with that, and for whatever it's worth. So in general, well, first of all, I want to say that this kind of attraction is built into the genome for, I don't know, 1 billion years or maybe more than that. And Buddha was certainly subject to these kind of things. And so I imagine that it's not like a switch where you do one or the other, whether you do attraction or dharma, but that dharma is some kind of a new relationship to that which naturally arises, like these attractions, these strong, innate attractions.
Yeah.
And so what's common, like money or sex, is this sense of self. And so my strategy is to hold it in compassion, recognize that there's a sense of self here, self and other, sometimes very strong, and the intention is simply to look at that and trust.
Yeah. The thing that I think I will emphasize in what you said is this notion that whatever is arising, and we can reassure ourselves when we're carried away by things that are very strong impulses. We say, oh, this is kind of an innate circumstance. Whether it's innate or not, if it's a strong tide of experience arising that's very magnetizing, whatever story we say about it, it's strong. And then what we do in relationship to that is how we bring our practice to it. And so in that, it's helpful to look at what is actually beneficial, what's not so beneficial. The kinds of things that come up with all kinds of strong attractions. Along with that can come strong aggression. And this is like, it's good to keep an eye on these things, because that strong sense that I can I can scratch the cosmic itch in some way if I just ratchet up my strong will to get something. And that is can lead to grave harm for ourselves and for others. Usually it's only brought to our attention when others notice that it caused grave harm. So it's something to be looked at. But in that, it's I think culturally speaking, it has been. For most of my life anyway, it's been culturally not considered something to bring up in polite society. You don't talk about sex or money. You don't sit down on the bus next to somebody and say, well, so how much money do you have? Or, when was the last time? This is, no. We don't go there, and there is a way in which that resistance only breeds kind of an obscuration, an obscuring of things, and we don't gain an appreciation for what we experience in common with others. That we're, oh my goodness, we're really quite in the same boat with these things. And in that, the kind of a humility and compassion can arise, and a deeper willingness to look at things that otherwise we could treat as a sense of like personal defect. I alone am the one that is at a loss. I alone, however it is that we might set ourselves apart. So these things are, I think they're important to talk about in a delicate way.
As the streamer, I just want to ask that you please turn off the microphone when you're not speaking into it. Green light is on. When it's not on, it's off. Thank you.
Phil.
Speaking of death, a good friend is doing Death with Dignity today, and I had asked Dora and Bill to speak with me and my wife about that on Tuesday. We had a very good talk. It's very useful, and we had a very good goodbye with Dawn on Thursday. But you know that awareness that at this moment the fellow is taking those drugs to end his life, I mean, literally at this moment, is does kind of focus the attention. It's a poignancy about life. I mean, it's like a Class 5 rapid, you know, how, you know, when you enter a Class 5 rapid, you are very aware. And that's sort of the way I feel right now, that awareness of life that, you know, that is piqued by the knowledge that a friend is cashing in his chips at this moment. And of course, I mean, it happens every moment, right? There's always somebody voluntarily or involuntarily leaving this life out there. So why is this special? I don't know. I guess it's because there's no equanimity for me. I have friends, and they are special. Not a question, really, just an observation that I just really have this feeling of being intensely alive at this moment because a friend is leaving this life at this moment.
Yeah. Well, you're experiencing one of the things that's the reason that the contemplation of death is considered an important contemplation. When we sit down to do calm abiding, and we educate ourselves into the near infinite ways that we chase after things, almost all of them with this sense of if only. There's something kind of like something will be better. If we're thinking about the past, we might be thinking something would have been better if this or that. Or the future will be better if this or that. There's some notion of looking somewhere else other than right here. We're caught up. We're lost. And the contemplation of death throws a large monkey wrench into this notion of that I always have the future to get something else right, that something will improve some other time, that somewhere other than right now, it will be where things get fixed. And death just kind of snips that movie, just. And it's important. It's important for many reasons, one of which is that we tend to not take seriously the opportunities that we have. If we think we have an infinite amount of time, it's like, oh yeah, I'll put this thing on the table, I'll think about that, or maybe I'm going to add this in, I'll get around, I can't actually deal with all these things right now, but I will, but I think I should have some more things to kind of surround myself with. Just arrange this one's now. This constant preoccupation with plans and things, and preoccupations for the future. Just loading ourselves up with stuff. We can, at minimum, be more realistic about what we have to have on our own plate. But I think deeper yet, if we really think about death from the point of view of, what's the core of my experience in any moment? At death, all this sense of, I see all these things, that sense feels gone. The sense of a body, the tactile domain, this sense fading away. All the sense fields dissolving. What's the core of awareness? The contemplation of death can actually bring us closer to that, some appreciation. It can give us some motivation to look more clearly at our experience, instead of being constantly chasing after one more thing, another thing, another thing. What is actually the core of experience and awareness? What is this that's unfolding moment to moment? We might actually take that more seriously. It was quite something having that conversation with you and Ingrid. Phil originally just said a friend of ours is about to die or close to death, something like that. And so I had in my mind one set of possibilities, kind of, somebody's very sick, they have a terminal illness. Or maybe they're really sick, maybe they're quasi-comatose right now. It could be all kinds of things, but it was very different. Very different. Kind of like, oh. And it brought to mind the unique circumstances of each of our deaths. Each and every one will be its own unique circumstance. Just as right now we are having our own unique experience of the vitality of being alive. With all its miraculous possibilities, with all its torturous irritations, all the play of things that are possible. But in the midst of all those possibilities, there is this possibility for recognizing exactly how is this all coming up? What is the nature of this experience? What's the nature of being caught, chasing after appearances, chasing after possibilities? What's the nature of being caught? How can I leverage the potential for freedom that I can discover just when I find that I'm distracted and I can bring my attention back? I can actually let go of being caught. How can I leverage my appreciation for that potential? We tend to not give ourselves much credit for things that could be that simple as just noticing that we're distracted and the possibility that we could return to an awake place, aware of the simple experience of the breath coming and going. It's too simple to actually be the seed for something very profound. So we don't give credit where credit is due. We all have the potential for profound discovery right in the midst of whatever experience is arising. But the same strategy that drives us to think that something else, if we arrange it differently, will be better in the future, that same global strategy in life is there right in the moment when we're saying, oh, yes, okay, I return to the breath, but something else must be better. Something else must be deeper. And we're still, once again, we launch ourselves into this quest for an improved future. Something better, somewhere else, some other time in the future. Improvement's possible, but in the end, what's the most profound thing is what we discover about the moment of experience unfolding. That will always be the thing. That will always be the raw material for whatever we can work with. We will never, in our own experience, have anything else to work with besides what's unfolding in the moment. So this is my morning's contemplation on death and all that stuff. There's nothing like talking about death and sex to shut people up. Should we go on to money? Marcy.
Probably isn't a 5-minute answer, but we'll give it a go.
Maybe it ought to be
Yeah.
from my side.
Well, maybe it is. I was just reading this morning about ground, path, and fruition. And was thinking about, lately I've been just having a lot of moments where I realize, or I have these little awarenesses of there not really being any ground that I can hang on to. And so I'm wondering, and what you would say, like, so ground on the Mahamudra path of ground fruition, ground path and fruition is a different, well, maybe it's not different. Like, is it something that we hang on to? What is ground in that context? Is that bodhicitta? Is it Buddha nature?
Yeah. Yes. That was the less than 5-minute answer. Ground, path, and fruition. This is it's a classic presentation within the practice of Mahamudra, and what it refers to. We can say the ground. What's the basis of experience? I'm talking about. So, what can you discover if you look directly at the nature of experience as it arises? You discover the nature of that experience. You discover the nature of the awareness. You discover basically the union of the awareness and the experience arising. You discover that nature. So the ground for all practice really is that situation. You could say that's the situation in which we practice. The path are all those things that allow us to discover the nature of the ground, the nature of experience and awareness. And the fruition is that recognition. So you can, from within the Mahamudra path, we talk about ground and fruition being the same, except one is, from the beginning, is unrecognized. The ground is unrecognized at the beginning, and recognized, it's called fruition. And path is just all the stuff that we do in between to recognize the nature of the ground, to recognize the nature of our experience. You could say experience/awareness. But in that process, you mentioned the word ground. You mentioned the word groundless, that sense of things not being nothing to hold on to. That comes along the way when we start to look very, very carefully at our experience as it arises. The things that we take to be kind of like the furniture in the room of our life. And that's where the sofa in my life goes, and this is where the kitchen is, and that's where, and this is where I am. That's the bedroom. I move around. And when we start to look closer at our experience, it looks less like the story that we told ourselves about our experience and about ourselves. And that's like, ooh, less to hang on to. But in that, there's a great openness. There's also less that we feel we have to hang on to as we go into it. And that's important, because we can find that within that sense of sort of a feeling of opening and some groundlessness that can come with that, there's also can be a recognition that there is kind of intrinsic possibility for well-being. That's actually not dependent upon this very solid sense of Colonel Bill in the library with the lead pipe. This is kind of it's like my life was a clue game, and I just had to get these three things sorted out: who, what, and where. So there's more possibility once things start to open up, and we don't feel that kind of dependence. But at the beginning, it can be a little bit, whoa, who stole my Colonel Mustard hat?
I was just going to ask if we could have like a minute to reflect on dawn and sort of well-wishing and or whatever contemplation people would like to do just before we say our prayer. I think it's a beautiful opportunity. I appreciate that you brought that, Phil.
Yeah. Sense of open-heartedness and well-wishing to connect with all beings, particularly those who are going through transition from life to death and beyond. And dedication.
By this virtue may I quickly realize Mahamudra and establish all beings without exception in this state.
Thank you. And as Willa reminded us, we have our opportunity